Brad Treliving has been announced as the new GM for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the 18th in the club's history. Let's now bring in our next guest, Chris Johnston of NorthsStar Bet. Chris, it's finally done. The Leafs finally have their GM. From what you know, why did the Leafs end up deciding on Brad?
Well, certainly, I think the fact that he's been through so much, 9 years in a Canadian market, stands out. He's got deep relationships in the industry. The Leafs obviously are entering an important summer, right? They have to get a new contract extension done with Austin Matthews. They have the potential to do one with William Nylander. There's a number of other roster issues that need to be addressed here. And I just think with where the club is at, Brendan Shanahan and the MLSE board didn't feel comfortable going into that kind of period with so much riding on the next season and the next couple seasons for them without an experienced hand there. And then when you look further through the list of candidates, I think that Brad Treliving stands among those that were available now and that have had a long tenure previously in the GM seat somewhere else.
CJ, when he was announced as Calgary GM a number of years ago now, he used the terms heavy hockey and tough hockey and hard hockey. He loves this. Now, listen, Brian Burke was involved then, I know. I really hope we hear the words truculence tomorrow. I doubt we will at the press conference. But, I mean, that's a big philosophical change from what we've seen with the Leafs in recent years. Is that part of the reason, do you think, the way he looks at a team being built?
Well, certainly that would be what was discussed when Brad Treliving met with Brendan Shanahan, kind of his vision and what he likes, what he would do, I'm sure, in hypothetical to Leafs roster. And, look, the game has changed, too, in the 10 years since Brad Treliving had his press conference in Calgary. I would, think it's fair to surmise that his own views might have shifted somewhat. But, he did consistently get some heavier kind of teams. And I think the Leafs themselves have actually been moving in that direction slowly the last couple seasons. Look at their last trade deadline, bringing in Nola Chari, bringing in Luke Shen, even Ryan O'Reilly to a degree. I think that they were prioritizing some of those aspects of the game, even under Kyle Dubas. But, I'll have to kind of wait and see how things play out with Brad Treliving. I don't sense that he's someone that can easily be placed in one camp or another in terms of the sort of hockey team he wants to build. I think he's a very open-minded guy, someone who takes in a lot of information and makes his decisions from there.
Chris, was it Brad Treliving's job to lose from the beginning, or were there any other candidates that came close to meet what Brendan Shanahan and the Maple Leafs were looking for? Because we heard names like Mark Bergevin, Doug Armstrong was kind of bandied about. Was there anybody else that came close to Brad Treliving?
I don't think so. I think it truly was Brad Treliving's job to lose. The fact that he was in Toronto last week for face-to-face meetings, the first candidate that we know of that got to speak to the Leafs, Mark Bergevin ended up doing a Zoom type of interview / conversation with Brendan Shanahan. But, for all the other names you might have heard bandied about, I'm not sure that this was that many candidates deep in terms of those that actually got into the process for Toronto. I think that, with the timeline, you had the scouting combine next week in Buffalo on the horizon. Obviously, when you get into June, it's just a really busy month on the NHL calendar in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different reasons. And so, the Leafs didn't really have the benefit of time since they fired Kyle Dubas on May 19th. And so I think that it was sort of by necessity a smaller search. Plus, given what they were looking for, it's maybe not as big a roster of candidates they had to consider. And so ultimately, I think when you siphon all that down, it was Brad Treliving's job to lose. He didn't lose it, and hence he's going to be unveiled on Thursday.
Hey, Chris, if Brendan Shanahan's intention is to run it back with his core four, do you think that was a sticking point in the negotiation and maybe something Treliving had to agree on to get the job?
Well, I would think it's something he likes, quite frankly. I mean, as much as he's made big deals in the past, and we can point to a number of them, it's not really an ideal circumstance to be hired on May 31st and have to contemplate, potentially moving off a player of the magnitude of the Leafs core four within a month or maybe 6 weeks' time. I think that really what this guarantees to me or signifies is that those big changes probably are going to be at least a year off if they happen at all. I think that had Kyle Dubas stayed on as general manager, if he was retained and extended, the possibility of a big change to the roster was more likely, just given the fact that he was 5 years deep, that he seemed, frustrated with the way things went in the playoffs, said he was disappointed. They only scored 2 goals in the last 7 playoff games. It seemed as though he was ready to contemplate those bigger changes. I think it's really difficult to throw someone into the job and expect them to do the same. I mean, Is what's Brad Treliving's experience going to tell him? It's probably going to tell him that whatever he thinks of the Leafs from afar or has thought of them from afar, he's going to learn a lot more when he's inside the office every day, when he builds relationships with those players, when he speaks more in depth with their agents or their families or other people around them. And I think that he'll be in a better position down the road to make a big decision. It'd be hard to imagine him, being tossed in here now and making that kind of trade.
So now that they have their general manager, now the focus goes to the head coach and Sheldon Keefe. What does this hire mean for Sheldon Keefe and his future with the Toronto Maple Leafs? As we know, June is a busy month, so they might have to make a decision pretty soon, I would bet.
Yeah, I would think that'll be the first decision. And, while there's no clear indication yet, we'll see what Brad Treliving says on Thursday. I don't think it'd be a total surprise if Sheldon Keefe was retained. He does still have 1 year remaining on his contract. We've seen kind of the pool of available head coaches start to be drained a little bit here in the last couple of days with some hirings. A lot of other teams are far down the road of having, had multiple interviews and made those kind of decisions. It's a case where I think the Leafs are comfortable with Sheldon Keefe for the time being. I mean, he's had a tremendous amount of success, as has the team in the regular season. You might have some questions about what you've seen in the playoffs, but for Brad Treliving, I think that'll be something he's got to clarify pretty quickly here. And don't be surprised if, what he chooses to do is just to go forward with Keefe behind the bench and see how things evolve with their relationship and with the team on the ice.
So he inherits a big staff in the front office, a huge staff, but it's a Kyle Dubas built staff as well. Do you expect many changes? I mean, has he got people who are very much associated with him and how he builds teams that might be coming this way?
I would think those changes will happen in time. It remains to be seen as of this hour what Kyle Dubas is going to do. I mean, if he takes another job, if he ends up, say, in Pittsburgh, where we know he's had discussions with the Penguins, I would think that there's there'll be a few calls that Kyle Dubas would want perhaps to bring some people with him to a new job. If that doesn't happen, then it probably takes a little while for things to shake out. The understated or maybe under discussed part of changing a GM is it's that the roster is it's not the smallest part. Obviously it's what that GM is going to be gauged on, but everything that happens behind the scenes, it just takes a long time for someone to come in and understand what he has, who wants to be part of the solution, who's maybe looking out the door, wondering if Kyle Dubas is going to be calling him. I mean, I think this will evolve over time, but it's going to take some time. And so, it's kind of a weird first month or two because there's so many questions about the team and the direction of the franchise and what might happen. I would think over time, Brad Treliving will bring in some people that he's worked with in the past and been comfortable with, as I would expect some to depart should Kyle Dubas get hired elsewhere.
We're speaking with Chris Johnston of NorthsStar Bets. Chris, it's been a mixed bag of feelings, I think, on social media from Leafs fans. I mean, more negative than positive in terms of Brad Treliving taking over the role. What's one thing, or what should fans know about Treliving heading into this job come this season?
Well, he's an extremely bright guy, thoughtful guy, very well respected and liked guy in the industry. And look, this is his second chance to be a general manager. I mean, the one thing that when you look at a GM's record, we don't know what sort of internal pressures he was dealing with from ownership. Obviously in his last season in particular in Calgary, where the Flames missed the playoffs disappointingly, there was, some struggles with his relationship with Daryl Sutter, the coach. I mean, there's a lot of things more than just, did you win in the playoffs or not that go into judging the tenure of a GM. And so, I think the fact that he's done it before, that he's going to have some fresh ideas, it's a new situation. And obviously it's a fresh set of eyeballs on the Leafs roster. For whatever you thought of Kyle Dubas's job or not, the reason we're in this situation primarily is the team didn't do enough winning when it mattered. And, that doesn't necessarily fall on the GM. Ultimately, it might be on the players, but now you've got a new GM viewing those players and coming in with a chance to put his imprint on things. And so, I can understand why people get nervous around change. I think it's a natural thing. As a human, it can be hard to go through change. There's that element of the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen, quite evidently. But, in Brad Treliving, the Leafs have found a very well-respected executive, someone who's still pretty young, and I think has a lot to prove himself and can kind of change the way his own career is tilted here if he's able to make the moves that get the Leafs over the top.
CJ, under Dubas and Lou Lamoriello before him, it became a very tight ship, it seemed. The Leaf organization, not much was leaked out. Tough to get information. As an insider, what do you expect from the Treliving era? Anything different at all? What's the reputation?
I don't know that there'll be these leaks vastly going through the organization, because I think, frankly, Brendan Shanahan doesn't appreciate that or like that. And so, he's now Brad Treliving's boss. But, Brad's been known to be someone who's, friendly with the media, polite with the media. I wouldn't expect that will change now that he's here in Toronto. I don't know that you're going to get a lot more rumors necessarily, but things are obviously going to shift and change somewhat. And I do actually think when you go through a change like this, that's when more people, start talking, because, it was, a pretty tight ship. You're right, because there was a lot of continuity, consistency. I think trust built up in that front office. I mean, now things are moving. It's a little different. And so there might be a period here where a little bit more gets out, but ultimately it's clear that at the top ends of the Leafs organization, where things haven't changed, I think they value those sorts of things. And so unfortunately, I'm going to have to be scraping around for whatever stuff.
I was going to say, get that expense card out, CJ. A lot of beers being bought for certain people the next few months.
Well, at least we can do that again after those pandemic years.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. That's bang on. Chris Johnston. Chris, you've been fantastic. Thanks as always.
All right, guys. We'll talk soon.